If you have money, you're fine. You'll pay. You'll pay your way to go to private school. You'll pay your way for extra help. You'll pay your way for pot learning. But if you don't have money, lack of a better word, it sucks to be you in New York City.
Hi, I'm Natalia Marakfur with Restore Childhood, and I'm honored to be here with George Lanese, who's the co-founder of About You, an organization that's been so important to fighting for getting kids back to normal in New York City, with sports and academic coaching and organizing rallies and just being a really loud voice for the kids throughout the entire pandemic. Thanks so much for being with me, George.
Thank you for having me, Natalia.
So George, tell me a little bit about what you guys do, what About You is, and the kids you work with, and what the last couple of years have been like for you.
What we do at About You is we level the playing field by providing resources, whether it be information, academics, or coaching support, and using sports and physical training to get kids to focus on academics and a career. And it had gone really well, and it's still going well, but the hurdles that we have now of explaining to kids that it's not a level playing field, that the institutions that are pushing these rules and mandates do have it out against them. That right now there is, you can't tell a kid just work hard, because there are certain rules in place that are barriers to success right now.
What are the rules?
The mandates for extracurriculars and how long it took sports to come back. I mean, we've been fighting this now since July of 2020, and New York City has always been last with bringing back sports and extracurricular. They were the last in the state when 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when the entire state had all sports except for high risk. New York City had no sports and no extracurriculars. And finally, when they brought it back, it was a complete mess. Then right midway through bringing it back, they slammed the vaccine mandate on it. And now a year later, they still have the same vaccine mandate. And they're the only school district in the whole state of New York that has this mandate. In addition, you could literally cross the street and go to a private school, and they don't have the mandate. So kids are being turned away from extracurriculars and sports, which is a key driver to not only providing future career success, life skills, it's pushing kids towards the streets.
And do kids ever talk about the impact of these mandates? Are kids aware that
kids are now accepting that they're not accepting, but know that they have no choice, that they're a second-class citizen in New York City? If you're a public school student or if you're a New York City employee, you have different rules that you have to live by.
For instance, Kyrie Irving.
And
can you tell us what happened to Kyrie Irving?
Kyrie Irving was not allowed to play in New York City, but he was allowed to play in other cities. And then he pushed, fought back with the vaccine, and Mayor Adams allowed him to play, made the exception. And this is something that we've talked about for a long time, is that if you have money, you're fine. You'll pay. You'll pay your way to go to private school. You'll pay your way for extra help. You'll pay your way for pot learning. But if you don't have money, lack of a better word, it sucks to be you in New York City.
Yeah. One thing that I think is surprising is that this vaccine mandate doesn't actually just punish the families who haven't gotten their children COVID vaccinated. I mean, that's the other thing I want to point out. These kids are fully vaccinated. They have all the standard, vaccines, the childhood vaccines. They have to, because that's what they needed to go to school. So they're not really unvaccinated. I know that's not how the press likes to, throw these terms around, but I've tried to differentiate and say, these are the families who have chosen not to give their children the 2 doses of the COVID vaccine. That's it. But I think that the one thing that people believe is that, the vaccinated players are just fine, their teams are fine. But in reality, I've heard that both the vaccinated and unvaccinated players are being penalized because the teams are incomplete. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that I want to get off the top is that what's very extremely frustrating from Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams is that they're not explaining the why. Why is only New York City kids they have to be vaccinated? And we all know that the vaccine does not stop the spread of COVID. So what is the risk? They're not explaining any of that. And what you're saying, the impact is this. Last year, Right? You know, we're kind of concentrated with football, but the fall sports, football and volleyball, which are high risk, we thought that those sports would be crushed in participation because of the vaccine mandate. But it actually affected all sports because kids are demotivated. But the way it really affects the vaccinated person is this: you don't have enough players. And 80% of the games were canceled for JV football. And here's where you run into a big issue. If the JV games are canceled, I know my first year of high school, I was 5'2", 110 pounds. They would have to put me on varsity against 18 and 19-year-olds that could weigh up to 300 pounds. So you're talking about bodily harm to kids that want to play a sport, and they don't have the ability to actually play in games because they don't have JV. So last year we lost 80% of the games to JV. You're going to lose the same again this year. So you're losing the feeder system where potentially New York City sports, public school sports could be almost gone in a few years. They're not giving the numbers out, but I would bet that we lost over 15,000 kids that used to participate in sports that are out, or they have left the system. I mean, if you're really good, you can go on to private school, but they're destroying public school sports. And now the alternative is from 3 to 6. Kids are just hanging out. And that's the last thing you want when crime is rampant in New York City.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was wondering last year where they were going, you know, when sports were closed and during 2020. I mean, it's not like that, you know, these kids are just disappearing because we're shutting our doors to them. So I think that's something that's been on my mind for a while. So over the weekend, I was shared a form from the PSAL that talked about, it's a release form that parents sign if their children are playing in PSAL, releasing them of any damages because they may be playing with unvaccinated players. And there hasn't really been any clarity about what this form is. So I was wondering, you know, your thoughts.
So they're not going to give it all back, sports. All this vaccine thing they're talking about is allowing kids that in public schools to play non-public schools that don't have the mandatory vaccine. For example, the first couple of weeks, you know, in PSL, some schools are playing out of state. And I don't understand as a public servant how Hochul and Adams can talk about that they're going to only govern those people that agree with them. And they're not going to give us, the rest of us, answers because the kids are suffering. They don't have a vote and they have no answers right now. We don't know when this is going to end. It's 2.5 years going, and for all we know, this is going to go on forever.
And then in some areas, it ended a long time ago. So it's really, you know,
we started fighting back in July of 2020. New Jersey had football. New Jersey had all sports. The Catholic schools had all sports except for football, but they played 7-on-7.
Do you know how that impacted scholarships?
Extracurriculars and sports are a great avenue to get into higher education. You've now shifted those opportunities to those people that have money. So the people that keep on winning out on this are those that have the resources. Because if you had the resources and your kid played sports or had extracurriculars, they now took those opportunities that in the past would have went to kids in New York City. And it's going to keep on going on because if you have less kids from the city participating in extracurricular and sports going forward, now we've shifted those opportunities to those that have. So the pay-to-play model is growing, and the wealth gap is going to be 10 times worse 5 to 10 years from now because of the academic gap.
It's really very, very concerning. And you see that kids are gaining weight and that we're losing life expectancy years, and yet we're continuing to restrict kids. And that just seems to be so unfathomable to me.
If you put kids first and invest in kids, we wouldn't have any of these problems. What the concerning part right now is what direction is the government going to go in? Because like you said, I know in New York City, Adams went against Hochul about what she's doing with bail reform and crime. So we're now putting our kids in a crime situation. We're also putting them in a health situation from mental health and obesity. Obesity skyrocketed. We work with the youth organization, and after COVID, the lockdown came back. There were some kids that, as young as 10 years old, that gained 100 pounds. And if you're looking down the road for future health issues, obesity is one of the largest things that cause a lot of the problems with COVID, and they're not addressing that. So they're also closing down parks. They're doing all the construction at once. So if we don't change this now, the future for kids is going to be a lot worse, and it's not fair. We should be doing everything we can to invest in the future. There's so many great children in New York City that are not being supported the way they should.
Yeah, remember how the libraries were closed for like over a year, and the kids couldn't do sports, and I just kept thinking, where's everyone after school? They can't go to the library. I mean, yeah, I know that people who have money can hire their private tutors or go to, special pods and classes or go and travel. But what about the other people, the other kids? They're not staying safe. That's not safe.
100% what you just said is those that had money invested in pod learning, tutoring, moved their kids, shifted to private school, put their kids into AAU sports.
What is AAU sports?
Those are amateur athletics where you pay to play for those travel teams. Like I don't know what parents are supposed to do if your kid was in extracurriculars and you worked during that time. Who's watching your kids? Like if the government is not investing in all kids and giving all opportunities, there could be a negative element that's going to invest in your kids. And that's, the rise in gangs in New York City.
And I've also heard, just from talking to you over the years and your student athletes, that sports really keep kids in school, because I know we have a chronic absenteeism issue.
Because athletics provides more structure. So your day is mapped out for you. Also, there's higher requirements to continue playing sports. You have to have a higher level GPA. So it's always, even back when I played, and I was a really good student, but my father held over me that sports would be pulled if my grades dropped. So you also have an extra level of monitoring of your grades because your coaches monitor your grades. Now you take away sports, there's less emphasis on academics and oversight of academics, but there's also less of a desire for a lot of kids to go to school. And there's a direct correlation to what they're doing. That there's also the element of what they've done over the last 2 years is that first it started with religion, then it started with sports, and then they attacked the family. They're breaking up community. And without that community, sports bring community in the building. Kids rally around it. Now, what community do you have? You're not sure if you're going to have sports, but when you do have sports, your unvaccinated parent, which is half the parents, can't come and watch you play. So they're just tearing down positivity and hope and community, which we sorely need right now.
Yeah, I agree. And just getting kids outside and moving and working together in teams after all the isolation and the breaking down of relationships and the barriers. I mean, I think that's so essential. So it's just completely anathema that they're doing all that.
As we talk about this, and I forgive me because I smile. I don't mean to be smiling. This doesn't make any sense. It's like we're having a conversation. This makes no sense. And lack of a better word for curse, this is batshit crazy. This is completely crazy that we're having a discussion about whether kids can play sports or have extracurricular, or that kids can have equality to everybody else in the state of New York. When New York City is supposed to be the melting pot, the land of hope, the American dream. But we're having a discussion that 2.5 years later, only New York City kids still can't play sports. It makes no sense, and nobody's giving answers. So I'm thankful that you're getting it out there to the public, because believe it or not, a lot of people in the suburbs don't really know this is still going on. Governor Cuomo 2 years ago pushed that we got to save everyone's grandparent. Why aren't we trying to save every kid?
I thank you for joining me and for continuing to be a very loud and devoted voice to the kids and to sports and athletics.
Any help we can be there. One thing is that the name of our organization, About You, is called About You because it's about you, the kid. All the issues that we're running into society right now are adult driven. So the adults need to clean up their act, not the kids.